Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Matt Dickens with the Governor's Committee with People with Disabilities. And I'm doing a special presentation related to state legislature and how we can effectively advocate for disability issues. We have invited two representatives from in collaboration. The first one is Dennis Borel, who's at the head of the coalition of the state of Texas with people with disabilities, and also Scott Daigle, a public policy director for Texas Committee for Developmental Disabilities. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we'll start with I will ask some questions to the panelists, and they will respond as best they can. And if the audience has any questions, we can go ahead and put the questions in the Q&A, and we will pick at the appropriate time to respond to those questions. So we'll begin. So the first question: why is it important for people with disabilities to be involved in the legislative process?
Oh, I'll tell you what, Scott, you and I will switch going first on the questions. I'll take this one first. Next question, you go first. Good deal. So this is Dennis Borel with the Coalition of Texans with Disabilities. We are a statewide cross-disability advocacy organization. I've been around since 1978, well before the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, founded by people with disabilities. We are a nonprofit organization. We have a statewide membership, and we actually have our small staff is located just a few blocks from the Capitol. We are primarily an advocacy organization. So why is it important for people with disabilities to participate in the legislative process? You know, when I was looking at this, Matt, and by the way, thank you, Matt, and thanks, Ron Lucy, and all my friends at the Governor's Committee on People with Disabilities for setting this. So you cannot have too much education about public policy and people with disabilities. It's so essential. And I keep thinking about the great quote that came from Justin Dart, who's generally called the father of the ADA, a Texan, an Austinite, actually. And if you around Austin might remember the old Dart Bowl bowling lane. That was one of Justin Dart's businesses. He had a great statement he would make as he'd go around, and he said, and I always like to make sure I get this right: get involved in politics like your life depends on it, because it does. And if I could bring it down to one word, why should you get involved? Access. If you're interested in access to healthcare, access to education, to employment, to the built environment, to civil rights, to appropriate guardianship, to medicines, to voting rights. Those are just some of the access issues that go on in each legislative session. Those are critically important for people with disabilities to have their voice in public policy. Off to you, Scott.
Yes, thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Matt, and the GCPD. So I'm Scott Daigle. I'm the Public Policy Director with the Texas Council for Developmental Disabilities. The TCDD is a federally funded state agency, and it is overseen by a 27-member governor-appointed board, 60% of whom are people with disabilities or family members of people with disabilities. And we provide grant funding for innovative projects to help improve the lives of people with developmental disabilities throughout the state. We also track policy. That's my job, what I do. Why is it important? You know, Dennis was great with his answer. I will just add a couple of things to that and say that, you know, there's the statement that if you're not sitting at the table, then you're what's on the menu. So the legislature considers thousands and thousands of bills each session. Many of those are going to deal with disability issues either directly or indirectly. And if people with disabilities are not engaged in that process, if they're not communicating with lawmakers about the issues that are important to them or how the issues they're considering will impact them, then they will get left behind. Then decisions will be made without considering the needs of the disability community. So it is essential that people with disabilities are at the Capitol, they're communicating with their lawmakers, they have their friends and family members communicating with lawmakers and sharing their experiences, because especially in the Texas Legislature, which is said to be a citizen legislature, the members only serve for generally 140 days every 2 years, and then the rest of the 2-year cycle, they're back in their districts, they're working regular jobs, doing whatever. So this is not a full-time thing for them. They may come elected to office with a very narrow view on the issues that they are expecting to consider when they go to the legislature, the things that they're going to be working on. And once they get there, suddenly they see all of these bills being filed, and it is a real awakening because they wind up confronting a lot of issues that they know absolutely nothing about. So again, it is essential for people with disabilities to go to the Capitol, to engage with them and educate these members on the issues that are important to them. I'll stop there because we'll probably touch on some of this in later questions.
That's right. Yeah, it's very important for people with disabilities to be involved in the process. Understanding the process, it never stops. There's new technology, new ideas, new things that come up, and we have to, as people with disabilities, do the work to make sure everybody's caught up on all this thing and they know what's going on. Thank you for answering that question. Okay, we're on to the next question. What are some of the strategies that have proven to be successful with passing disability laws here in past legislative sessions?
So I'll take this one on. So I think that honestly, the most effective strategy, I believe, is telling your story, being at the Capitol, getting there early. So we have the legislative session that is, 140 days every 2 years. And then after the legislative session, you have what we call the interim. That's the period when the legislature is not formally meeting, but they are researching issues that they may want to consider in the upcoming session, or they are tracking the implementation of legislation that they passed in the previous session. So it is important to remain engaged in the legislative session. It's also highly important to remain engaged in the interim, because then you have a little more time with lawmakers to introduce yourself, to let them get to know you, to spend a little more time on your issues than during the legislative session when they are considering so many different bills, so many different issues all at once. Obviously, we're in the legislative session now, so we don't have that interim time to spend getting to know the members, but it's still very important to just reach out to your lawmakers, to introduce yourself to them. If they are holding some type of town hall event, go to that, listen to them, and then be sure to go up to them at the end of the event, introduce yourself, ask questions along the way. Be sure to introduce yourself to the staff members, because the staff that work for these members, they are let's say that they're very important in terms of providing support to these members and sharing information. As I've said repeatedly, members are confronted with lots and lots of different issues, so they have a lot going on in their head. But so they may have like a cursory knowledge of a whole bunch of issues, whereas the staff members are going to have a much deeper knowledge on those particular issues, because they divide up the various things amongst the staff members in the office. So they'll have a little more knowledge about what you're talking about. So if you get a staffer on your side, that is very helpful in communicating to that lawmaker what you are trying to get done. Kind of talking in circles. Dennis, you want to add anything to that?
I would, and those are all great. The idea of advocacy is put an equal sign, and education on the other side of that equation is a good one. You know, I would say, you know, passing legislation, I'll go right back to the roots. The issues that CTD, we're called CTD frequently, takes on to try to pass, they don't come from me or the staff. They actually come from the people with disabilities who live in Texas, who contact us or contact our board and say, you know what, I've encountered this problem. And we'll look at it and determine, hey, there might be a public policy solution. So that adds reality and verity to what we try to do. So that brings us down to, okay, we have a real issue we're going to go after. And we kind of come up with game plan a little bit, you know, kind of game plan. So what are we going to do this? Okay, we're going to need to develop these relationships. We're going to target legislators in certain offices on certain committees. We'll try to find a champion or two. Like, for example, State Representative Donna Howard, who is now championing the community attendant wage issue in the House, whom Scott was chief of staff for. And it was really excellent. But there are champions. So we need to have champions, and we need to have other partners, you know, and those other partners can be you, the individuals in your communities, or there could be other advocacy organizations, or there could be other organizations not even related to disability that have an interest. So we want to have a verity of issue. We want to have a game plan so we know where we're going. We want to have some champions. We want to have partners, and we want to be prepared. Let's say one of the things in our game plan is just talking about the issue isn't enough. We might need to have some external data. Data-driven decisions are a popular term in the Capitol. So we hand over data. We get that data handed over and use that too. And then finally, when it gets down to passing a bill, that is an in-person issue. So to the extent any people throughout the state can do an in-person virtual or an in-person meeting in their district, or work with, or come to the Capitol, that is how you close the deal. And it's hard. I'm going to tell you, it's hard to do that. Oh, okay. I guess I'll take a success story, then kick it back to you, Scott, for a success story. I thought about this, and one that was well known to the governor's committee is, you know, about 6-7 years ago, I started wondering why people with disabilities had such poor oral health, and you know, and I generally assumed it to poor self-care and maybe attendants not doing a good job cleaning their teeth. But I was shocked to find out that a very large number of people with disabilities had no dental visits in their individual health plan. And we set about fixing that. It took us 3 sessions, but how did we do this? We did exactly things. So it came, the verity of the issue came from the people, okay? And then we were able to find champions, and we selected champions to try to persuade that were on the public health committees, health and human services committees, convince them. Then we had to undertake some studies because we found out there was little out there that was available. And we had to also fight, again, the state agency that frankly, in my opinion, didn't really want to do this, and hit it with a very large cost, which we were able to debunk. But it took us time, and we had lots and lots of partners, including people like the Texas Dental Association. You would not normally see them as disability groups, but they are the ones providing the dental care to people with disabilities. And went from the Doctors Association, the Hospital Association, many others outside the disability community. We passed that, and that now exists in statute today. So I'll kick it back to Scott for the second.
Excellent. And thank you, Dennis. I will just quickly add that Dennis mentioned that it's hard. Sometimes it's difficult to get this through, and it takes a lot of work. And I will just add to that that sometimes it takes a lot of time. Sometimes it takes multiple sessions to get a piece of legislation through the process. Many times you will pass something one session out of the House, but it doesn't pass through the Senate. And then the next session, it will pass through the Senate, but then not make it through the House because of timing issues. And then in the third session, you'll finally get it through both bodies and signed into law by the governor. One of those that comes to mind, Representative Mary Gonzalez from the El Paso area, she had legislation relating to teacher and staff development training to effectively serve all students. And that was a bill that she carried multiple sessions. It was typically one of the very first bills that would be heard in committee, voted out of committee, and put onto the calendar for the House floor. And then generally time would run out. It wouldn't make it through. They would have a bill on the Senate side that would maybe make it through, but then not make it through the House. So there were complications, but it took her like 3, or I believe it was 3 sessions to get that legislation through. We finally passed it through last session, right near the end of the term. So that's good to see that it's finally getting through, but patience is kind of the name of the game. There are certainly there are lots of bills like that. There is a bill actually having a hearing this week that would essentially eliminate capital punishment for people with intellectual disabilities, which is in response to a court ruling a number of years ago. And this legislation it's come up in repeated sessions, and it just can't seem to make it through the process. So this session, it's getting a very early hearing. It's being heard tomorrow, and we'll see where that goes. Hopefully, perhaps they'll make it through this time. I'll stop there.
So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that story and the effective strategies for advocacy. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next question. What are some of the ways that Texans with disabilities can engage effectively with legislators?
Okay, this one's my turn to go first. Actually, I think Scott really nailed this earlier on. We talked about it's not just during the legislative session, and it can't just assume any time, whether they're meeting or not. And always best to do it when they're local, when they're in your town, and go visit with them, go to those town halls, as Scott said. So since he answered that so, I think, really great, there's another part of this question that was given to us about, what do you need to know when you're communicating with them? I'd say the first thing is these are not individuals who are your superiors, your bosses. Actually, they work for you. They're, what's that old saying? They put their pants on one leg at a time, which is what you do unless you have a leg amputation and you put it on one leg at a time. But so the first thing is to realize that you're talking to them as they work for you. That doesn't mean to talk down to it, but in other words, don't be intimidated. Another point on here is, and this was I'm glad you brought this up, Matt, time. The most valuable commodity for legislators is their time. That's the thing they don't have enough of. You've heard, Scott mention about how incredibly busy are and so many issues in front of them. So to the extent that you can be brief, make sure you're known to them, talk about your issues, but don't go on and on and on, but offer to be of service to them, because their time is really a shortage. It's extremely shortage. And if they're like sitting there, now they're in their Capitol office and they're on a committee, and it may not be a committee that's normally related to people with disabilities, maybe something completely different, and they're on the committee and a bill comes by that they're supposed to discuss, and they see something in there about people with disabilities, and they're going to go, hey, I met that guy back in my district. Hey, didn't we? Yeah, here's his phone. I'm going to have my staffer call him and ask what his opinion is of this bill. And when you become that person, that go-to person, and frankly, it's not that hard. It's not that hard that you can really influence where they go with these things. So that's what I would say.
And I will confirm that that is something that takes place. As a former staffer for a state representative, I've certainly had, you know, numerous calls from my boss, where my previous boss, where she would say, hey, can you find me the contact information for that person we spoke to a few months back on this issue, because I want to call them and talk to them about this. So if you make yourself available, there are strong chances that you will be, there's a decent chance that you will be contacted in the future and used as the resource that you offered yourself up as. So getting back to the original question, what are some ways that Texans with disabilities can engage with our legislators? I will just say that the ways that you should engage are the ways, whichever ways you feel most comfortable with. If you're comfortable meeting in person, then set up a meeting and go to the district office or go to the Capitol office if you're available to. If you are most comfortable just sending them an email, then do that. Share your personal story in that email. Tell them why a certain issue or a certain bill is important to you, how it will impact you or your family. If you're most comfortable talking to them on the phone, then give them a call. The staff is there to answer, you know, any questions that you might have about a bill that's going through the process or that they're working on. You know, certainly if they are, if you're calling to provide support for a certain type of legislation, especially a piece of legislation that they are working on, they are happy to hear positive messages from you, because so many times throughout the day, staffers at the legislature are getting negative calls. They're getting calls from people who are upset about something, who want to vent about something, who want to complain about something, and getting a nice call, a happy call, is always a treat for a legislative staffer. So I think that, you know, any way that you feel comfortable. Dennis mentioned the visit and the limited time. I will also add that if you can leave something behind, just a one pager of material, be sure to do that so that they have something to refer to after the meeting. Especially if it's on like a particular bill. I will tell you that one of the things that the Texas Council for Developmental Disabilities is doing this session is we have a Bill of the Week feature where we highlight a specific piece of legislation that's going through the process. We give a breakdown of what the bill does, who supports it, who opposes it, if anybody, and where it is in the process. But one of the things that we're also doing this session is we are providing a link to a one-pager on those particular pieces of legislation. So that's something that you could print up, you can download and send to those lawmakers. It's not, it's not, the one-pager does not take a stand on the bill because we're a federally funded state agency. But it does provide details on the legislation that can help educate the lawmakers about what this particular legislation does. So that's maybe the type of thing that you would want to leave behind in an office. Also, be sure to leave behind your contact information so that you can be that resource. And then always follow up with an email and just say, hey, thanks for the meeting. It was great meeting, great talking to you about, and mention the specific issue that you talked about just to remind them. And that way they can have your information on file as well. All right.
Yes, thank you. We actually had one question here that popped up that I wanted to answer. There was one person that says that they don't have a representative. So I do want to clarify that every person who does reside in Texas does have a representative. Depending on where you live, it's easy to look that up. You can on any search engine and find your representative for a House member or representative or a senator. And you can find that information on the internet. So the next question here is, what are some important things to know when communicating with legislators? And I know that some people have already answered, we've touched on that, but I don't know if there's any additional information we'd like to include.
I think am I first on this one? I think so. So things to know about when communicating with legislators, I think it's very important that you know who the legislator is that you are communicating with. Take, 10, 15 minutes before a meeting just to take a look at them, take a look at the lawmaker's bio, find out what their background is, find out what committees they have been appointed to this session, take a look at the legislation that they have filed or signed on to. Sometimes you may go into a meeting and you start talking about an issue thinking that the legislator isn't going to know anything about that particular issue, but then it turns out that perhaps that actually is their profession. They have a good understanding of it. My old boss was a former registered nurse, so she was very knowledgeable about nursing issues. So we would have people come in sometimes that didn't realize that and would talk to her about nursing issues, and then she could immediately talk very in depth on the issue, and it would surprise people because they hadn't necessarily done their research. And a lot of times people are going into their meeting with, sometimes a dozen lawmakers in a single day. So you may not have time to research every single person that you're meeting with, but it really helps. Another thing that I'll say is, in terms of researching the bills that they are filing, you may go in and you may ask them to support, House Bill 199 that relates to child and adult, creating a sales tax exemption for child and adult diapers, which is the TCDD bill of the week from this past Friday. And you may go in and ask them to support that bill. And as it turns out, the lawmaker that you may be talking to could be signed on to that bill already. So then, instead of asking them to support the bill and having them tell you that they're signed on, you can instead thank them for supporting that piece of legislation. We really appreciate your attention to this issue. We're so glad to see your name attached to the legislation, and I'm hoping that you will, do all you can to make sure that it passes through this session. So I think that's also really helpful. Dennis, you have anything you want to add to that?
Just a little bit. I put in the chat the URL of Texas Legislature Online, which is a great source of information. Everything Scott said rings true, of course. But say, for example, the question about I don't know who my state representative or state senator is. Go to Texas Legislature Online. There's the URL. It's capital.texas.gov. And right on the homepage, you'll find where you can put in your address and find out who your state senator and state representative is. Not only that, you'll find a wealth of information, including, as Scott said, okay, you can, who are you going to talk with? You can find the individual page with information about your state senators, your state representative. And by the way, you may find something in that bio that you can directly relate to. Maybe they have some interest of theirs that you have a common interest. And briefly mentioning that, I see you like to go fishing. I like to go fishing too, There's a little human aspect to interactions with that. That's a great URL to know. It'll tell you about committee meetings, who's on committees, individual bios, who they are, what's happening, critical dates. I would bookmark it if I were you watching this call today.
just to add on to what Dennis had said about knowing a little bit more about the bio, there are going to be individuals, members of the legislature that have connections with the disability community. Some of them have siblings that are individuals with disabilities. Some of them may have children who have disabilities. You know, some of them may have been educators in the past wherein they interacted with, you know, the special education population. So I think that, you know, as Dennis said, go in, check that bio, because there may be a personal connection that you can latch onto that can help better explain the issue that you are talking to them about.
Yes, thank you. All right, so the next question we have, what are some good ways to keep track of how things are going with legislative priorities?
Okay, I'm up first on that. And, you know, there are many, but I'm going to say that one of the first things you might want to do is identify one of the disability advocacy organizations and get involved. They're all essentially free, and we want people in it. Yes, mine is the Coalition of Texans with Disabilities, and Scott is a disability. You know, it's a state agency, but I'll call it a disability advocacy organization too. And there are many others out there. There's ADAPT, the ARC of Texas. There's ones like Texas Parent to Parent that are parents of kids with disabilities. There are individual particular issues, maybe like everything from the Epilepsy Foundation to the Texas Society for Autism. And, you know, so there's a bunch of them. So I'm not, you know, yes, we'd welcome your contact, but find the one that fits you. Just find the one, any of them. And that will help you a lot, because they will put you into contact mode where they will update you with emails, and they will also share with you, say Scott's Bill of the Week comes up. You know, we'll put that on our Facebook page, and people will go off and look at his stuff. And then when we're doing, say, maybe a virtual roundtable, which we are doing one this afternoon, by the way, you know, that gets spread around, and you can go on that and spend an hour and listen to some breaking news from the Capitol then. But really, you can't do it alone. It's so, the sheer volume of stuff, even if you're just looking at only disability issues, is overwhelming. So find those people who are working in this business who can help you learn and answer your questions and make your time well spent. So when you do go and talk to your legislator, you feel prepared to do so.
Yes, I will definitely second that. It is important to find the organization that is tracking the issues that you're interested in and letting them do all the work. Some of us are paid to do this, you know, so we are tracking this all the time. I am literally going through every single bill, the caption of every single bill that has been filed throughout the session, and trying to find the ones that relate to disability issues. And there's no reason that you should be doing that. That's what you have me for. And I will take this moment to highlight a few of the resources that TCDD offers. So we have, I mentioned the Bill of the Week, which comes out every Friday. It's posted to our website, but you can also sign up for e-blasts. You know, where it'll wind up in your inbox on Fridays. On Mondays, we send out an e-blast for the Texas Legislative News. And this provides updates on important action at the Capitol, maybe a wrap up of some things that happened in the previous week, maybe a preview of some of the things that are happening in the coming week. We have a hearings to watch section that we're adding for the first time this week, because committees are finally starting to meet. So we will list some of the disability related bills that are getting hearings in the coming week, in case you're interested in tuning into that hearing, in case you're interested in submitting testimony. in case you're interested in going down to the Capitol and talking to lawmakers in person during that hearing. We also have a bill filing section that we've had for the, for the past however long we've been doing the legislative news, that includes a list of disability related bills that have been filed in the past week. There are other explainers that we include in the legislative news, like talking about the appropriations process, talking about legislative deadlines, links to resources that can be found from other organizations. In recent weeks, we have provided links to the GCPD's legislative recommendations for the session. We provided a link to the sign up for the webinar that Dennis mentioned that his organization does, the Raise Your Voice series, which is a deep dive on issues that are being considered at the Capitol. And it's a great resource if you have the time to tune into those meetings. You can learn a lot about what's going on there. I will also mention another thing that we do is at TCDD is we have our Instagram feed, and I am posting a couple of videos every week on Instagram, kind of providing updates on what's happening at the legislature. So I just recently did a video on my trip to the Capitol last week, where I dropped off testimony at one of the committee hearings. I dropped off some written testimony, and I did a step-by-step breakdown of arriving at the Capitol, entering the building, finding my committee hearing room, signing up, registering as a witness on the kiosk. So in like 90 seconds, I walk through the entire process. So you can watch that and familiarize yourself with that process in case it's something that you're interested in doing. So we have lots of updates like that, talking about just some of the things that are going on. So we're doing a lot to help keep you informed, and I know that a lot of other organizations are doing the same. You can sign up. Dennis mentioned a number of other organizations. Some of them have advocacy alerts that they will, if you sign up for their list, you will receive advocacy alerts when a specific bill gets a hearing that they think you should know about. And some of them may even provide links where you can press a button and send an email to your lawmaker about that piece of legislation. So there's lots to do, but again, rely on the organizations that are tracking all this to do much of the work for you.
Yeah, these are great results. Thank you for sharing with us with GCPD these resources, and we following those bills. Also, we're working in cooperation with that office to collect information, and feel free to contact us, the organization, and we can provide the next when we provide the next webinar. We're going to talk about some common accommodations that we could speak with the legislators about. So what are some common reasonable accommodations requested for engaging with legislators? Either one want to answer?
Okay, I guess I'll start on this, but basically, yes, a couple of things I would mention is if you are going to the Capitol is an old building, but it's also has new areas to it. So it's not the easiest place to navigate around particularly if you have a mobility impairment or a visual impairment, and there are places you have to figure out how to go. But let's start with the most obvious one. So you want to go to a committee hearing. If you go to the posting for the committee hearing, you will see at the bottom a person to contact and a phone number and an email, I believe, as well, to let them know you're coming, and you can request accommodations there. So that's one of the great ones. But again, the Capitol building is pretty old. So if you wish to go to the gallery in either the House or the Senate, you got to find your way to the small lifts they've installed to get people with mobility impairments into those galleries, and it can be tricky. But you can ask your way around and all that. And there are things, yes, there are videos that you can get captioning for the videos of the committee hearing. requesting the ASL interpreter. Now, if you're going to specifically meet with a legislator, you can do that, and I think they can contact someone in the Capitol. If you're going to committee, you can request that again. And there's stuff, yes, the accessible pickup. I think you're getting into a lot of detail here, but I'm going to add, I was looking at this thing. I saw one thing that jumped out at me that was on the list, and I'll let Scott is going to be able to address these too. If you have a meeting and you're going to a Capitol office that you have not been in, and you have a scheduled meeting, okay, call ahead. You know, because a lot of those offices are set up with furniture, they're tight, they're hard to get in for, say, people with power wheelchairs. They can be real difficult. But if they know you're coming, they can actually move stuff around and make it easier for you to get in. Now, that may sound like a little thing. It's not. It's not a little thing. If you can actually be in the office, in the legislator's office, meeting with them and talking, it's much better than out in the hallway where there's traffic and noise and distractions. So, you know, I know that wasn't on this list, but that's a little tip to pay attention to. I know Scott can answer a bunch of these others, so I'll just stop right here.
Yeah, I think Dennis really covered it mostly, but I will also add that yes, calling ahead to a legislative office and letting them know that you're coming is very helpful. It's very important. As he mentioned, some of the legislative offices, they have their desks because they're trying to pack as many desks into a small office as possible. So they will place their desk really, really close to the front door and put seats around it so that it is sometimes difficult for wheelchairs to navigate through those. So it is helpful to call ahead. I will also say that if you are unable to make it to the Capitol, the House committees have a system set up now. They introduced this last session in the midst of the pandemic, but it's continuing this session, I believe, where you can submit testimony, you can submit public comments through an online portal for House committee meetings. So you can go to the hearing notice for that particular hearing, and there's a link on that notice that you click on. Then you want to enter some information, you want to scroll down, find the specific committee that you are commenting for, find the specific piece of legislation or issue that you are providing remarks about, click on that, and then there is a I believe there's a character limit. Generally it's like 3,000 characters, which is a fair it's a fairly lengthy bit of public comment that you can leave. So then you could submit that. That is then provided to all of the committee members. It is included in the public record. For most committees, you can go in like a week after, and the committees have posted it on their on the website, the list of remarks that they received in addition to the in-person testimony. And unfortunately, the Senate is not doing that same, I guess, that same outreach, that same taking of information for the session, but the House is, and that is really helpful. And if they keep doing it, then perhaps the Senate will implement that same process as well in the future.
Matt, this is Ron Lucy with the GCPD. I just wanted to jump in and bring attention to the slide up on the screen. Matt has provided the contact information for the Senate ADA coordinator and the House ADA coordinator, who can also help assist with accommodations for Texans with disabilities that are coming to the Capitol to meet with their elected official or to attend a hearing. Also, the State Preservation Board, they have responsibility for the physical accessibility of the Capitol complex, including the Capitol building. And Matt has provided a link to the State Preservation Board. And as he points out at the bottom, certain accommodations do require 72 hours notice. So it's best not to wait till the last moment. On the upcoming slides that Matt's going to show, we have a couple of accessibility features at the Capitol that Matt is going to point out to our audience, including a newly implemented pickup and drop-off location, that was partially funded by the Governor's Committee on People with Disabilities.
Thank you. Thank you for that additional information. I appreciate that. So on to the next slide, we're going to talk about captioning. Is captioning available for videos of committee hearings? So you look on the online basically for that. So on the Capitol, there's a description for Chrome and other kinds of computer uses. So there's no mention of that. So you want they prefer that you use Chrome to be able to get access to captioning for that.
So
Next,
the Texas Legislature online, they do stream committee hearings, and there's not always real-time captioning using a human captioning agent to caption those hearings, but Chrome does have a plugin that adds captioning using artificial intelligence. It will use speech-to-text translation and provide captioning. It's remarkably pretty accurate, and depending on the quality of the captioning company you use, it might even be better than a live human agent for captioning. But basically, when they direct you to use Chrome, that's what they're pointing out, is using the speech-to-text engine in Chrome for captioning with those video hearings. Dennis, Scott, do either of you all have any more insight on the responsibility for the House or the Senate to provide real-time captioning for their hearings?
I don't. I will tell you that a couple of sessions ago, there was an interim charge related to accessibility at the legislature. The House Administration Committee had a hearing on that, but nothing really came out of it. One of the things that advocates were pushing for was real-time captioning for all committee hearings. It hasn't happened yet. We're hoping that it will at some point in the future.
thank you. Next up, so where is the accessible pickup and drop off? Just 207 West 14th Street. A sign is posted and pointing to accessibility transit amenity. So there's the drop off point. And from that location, you can go to the accessibility, have the access there on the north side of the Capitol.
Yeah,
And there's a picture of that there. So in that sign says employees entrance only. Don't go to that entrance. Go over to where they have at the front or of the Capitol on the north side, and they have they have a ramp there, and it gives you accessibility to the building.
Matt, this is Ron. I just want to jump in and say a couple more words about the accessible pickup and drop-off location. That came about as a result of a recommendation from an accessible parking study that we wouldn't have had if the Coalition of Texans with Disabilities hadn't approached the 85th Texas Legislature and asked us to do that study. And due to the security perimeter around the Capitol, that location is the closest that anybody with a mobility impairment can get to the north side of the Capitol, which is the accessible side, and be picked up or dropped off. Two simultaneous wheelchair vans can pick up and drop off people at the same time. And our former executive director, Pat Pound, tested that route out, and she was able to train her C&I dog, her service animal, within 15 minutes to learn that route from that drop-off point to the north end of the Capitol. She uses a clicker and uses those kiosks that you see, those little trail identifiers that show the accessible path. So that's kind of new. That just was put in at the end of the last session. So a lot of people aren't familiar with that. That's not exclusively for the use of Capitol Metro, for paratransit, or for anybody. Anybody can use it, including people using Uber or Lyft. I know the Preservation Board is trying to keep people from being picked up off the building that's at 15th Street because of security concerns, and they're even talking about removing that driveway entirely. So in the future, this will be not only the closest, but one of the only pickup, drop off points near the north end.
And Ron, if I could mention, it's on the west side of the Capitol, and it is near the corner of 14th and Colorado.
Correct.
Yeah.
We also have a recommendation that we want to honor Justin Dart by naming it the lead on transit amenity. You know that Justin Dart, his family says that they didn't want to have anything named directly Justin Dart, but his common expression, which I'm sure Dennis Borel remembers, is he would end his communications with lead on. And so we would plan to, with a resolution from the House and Senate, have his biography included on that structure and named in his honor.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you. And with the consideration of time, we're going to move on. Are the family restrooms available for individuals who use a personal care attendant to assist? So they are available on the ground floor, second floor, and both floors of the Capitol extension of that building.
Yeah, the family restrooms, that came about as a recommendation
And we have
from
a picture there
ADAPT.
also.
And that was implemented by the State Preservation Board 2 sessions ago.
Thank you. So what are some important things to remember if you are an ally advocating for people with disabilities at the Capitol, or for family members, friends, or other people, service people? So do we have any suggestions for that?
Dennis, you can probably answer this better than I can, but I will say that it's important to just be authentic in your conversations and in sharing the story. Share your own story, or if it is something that is attributed to a family member, or a friend, be sure to say that. Don't try and pass off someone else's story as your own. If you are not a if you are not a person with a disability, do not go into a meeting presenting yourself as a person with disability in your communications. Share your story from the perspective that you are coming from, or highlight the person whose perspective that you are sharing.
Yeah, that's well said, Scott. And when I think of, an ally, yes, there's allies, say family members, service providers. I would tell specific story. My friend had this experience. My coworker that I enjoyed working with for many years no longer works because we can't get reliable attendance. These things like this. And part of that, and this is important because sometimes, people view the disability community as being very small, but actually, when you look at the actual number of people who are connected to individuals with disabilities, it's a very, very large number. I'm gonna stray a little bit, and it's kind of related to this question. When we talk about allies, do allies necessarily have to be people who have direct connections to an individual with a disability? And I would say not. I mentioned a little bit earlier, like getting allies like the Texas Medical Association, the Texas Dental Association, folks like that. And there are all kinds of people with real power in that capital that, and I'm going to tell it to you straight, are making money off people with disabilities. That's their business. They might be healthcare providers, it might be pharmaceutical companies, it might be managed care organizations. And you know what? You have an advantage. You are the face of the issue. So that makes interesting possibilities available to you. Say you have a similar position on a bill that's shared by, say a managed care organization who are making tons of money off, disability services. You are in a position to help them realize their gains, and they are in a position to help you realize gains you want to make too. So it goes both ways. They have resources. They might have pro bono assistance for you, like some contract lobbyists, some attorneys, who might review bills to make sure you don't make a misstep on the detail of the language. They may have educational opportunities. I like to say that I've learned more about access to pharmaceutical medicines from the pharmaceutical companies than I ever learned from any disability sponsored educational event. And you know what I paid for that? Nothing. Nothing. They all provided that free. So think not just the people that are close to the individuals with disabilities, but others that can help you realize those goals. Because there are people out there that the legislators are going to look at with suspicion. And so you have an important role to play and say, wait a minute, yeah, maybe they are making some money off this, but you know what? I'm not making any money off this. But here's why I think it's important. And that can often make the difference between passing a bill or not.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So the last slide. So this is information from GCPD, the policy recommendations that we give every 2 years to the legislation to review. And we focus on people with disabilities and what the important needs are. It has been communicating with us from different people all over the state. And we gather that information and we document that for the legislation and for the governor to review. It's it can be an important way to resolve legislative action or going through admin action. So we encourage you to take a look at these policies and recommendations, and contact us, communicate with us if you have any other suggestions or ideas that would like to be put in for future reference. So. And the contact information is there. If you would like to contact us for more support or how to get started with advocacy in the state and legislation, and all that information is there. Any final? Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you, and we will contact us anytime if you have any questions. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.